It wasn't the blood that told them something was wrong. It was the silence. July 5th, 2024, Lafayette, Indiana. A summer night like any other, sticky with heat and stillness. Police were called to Franciscan Health Hospital after a woman had been dumped unconscious
tiny,
at the emergency
helpless,
bay.
barely
No
beginning
name,
his life,
no ID,
was brutally
just
taken by the
bruises,
very person
blood,
who should have
and a
protected
baby
him.
missing. The man who dropped her off? Gone within seconds.
Eliasard Moneus
Security
sat
footage
slouched at
showed
the
a
defense
blue
table,
sedan
his
screeching
expression
away from the
occasionally
ER
tightening in
entrance at
apparent pain.
1:03
The
a.m.
outlet reports that it wasn't
Nurses
until
rushed the woman
woman's
into
sentence
trauma
was
care.
handed down that
Her
he showed
face
any
was
real
caved
emotion,
in,
briefly
jaw
wiping away
shattered,
tears. Let's
cheekbones
get into the
broken,
background real quick. So this
strangulation marks around her neck. Whoever did this wasn't trying to scare her. He was trying to end her. That woman was the mother of Jacob Moneus, 3 months old, described by neighbors as a quiet baby who rarely cried. At that moment, Jacob's whereabouts were unknown, and his father, 28-year-old Eliasard Moneus, was missing. Detectives were dispatched to the couple's shared apartment on Shoshone Drive. What they found was not a murder scene, not yet, but something wasn't right. The front door was locked, no lights were on, no crying, no TV, no music. Just silence. Too much of it. A baby lived here. Inside, there were no signs of forced entry, but in the bathroom, the mirror was cracked. Blood smeared the sink. A trail of droplets led down the hallway. The floor near the kitchen was sticky. On the counter, a used baby bottle sat unwashed. The crib was empty. But what really got their attention was the white 5-gallon bucket near the fridge. It had a lid, a plastic handle, the kind used for bulk cleaning supplies, labeled laundry detergent. The smell was sharp and chemical. No one opened it. Not yet. There was no warrant, and without a body, no one could say what they were even looking for. Back at the hospital, the mother regained consciousness. For the first time. She couldn't speak, her jaw was wired shut, but with a pen and paper, she scribbled 3 words. He took Jacob. That was all police needed. An Amber Alert was issued, APBs were sent statewide, police located Moneus within 6 hours, hiding inside his car behind a strip mall near the outskirts of town. He was calm, compliant. When asked where Jacob was, he looked down and said nothing. They searched the car. No baby seat, no toys, no sign of Jacob. Interrogation began that evening. Moneus was read his rights and placed under audio and video surveillance. He refused to speak. He requested no lawyer. He just sat. Detectives pressed harder. What happened that night? Where's the baby? Why did he take him? Why did he beat the mother? No response. Finally, one investigator tried a different approach. He asked about the bucket. That's when Moneus smiled. A twitch, barely a curve of the lip, but unmistakable. And then he looked away. They returned to the apartment, this time with a warrant. Everything they missed the first time, the bucket, the smell, the silence, now screamed at them. Inside that sealed container was a body, submerged in a mix of detergent, water, and decomposition. The baby was found face down, skin bloated, lips blue, soaked in chemicals meant to clean floors. The bucket had been in plain sight. Moneus had lived with it for at least 24 hours, ate next to it, slept under the same roof. He didn't try to bury Jacob, didn't try to run far. He just let the body sit there, decaying silently in a symbol of erasure. What kind of mind does that? Neighbors described Moneus as distant. He was odd, said one. Didn't talk much, but I never thought this. One neighbor remembered hearing muffled screaming days before the baby disappeared. No one called it in. They assumed it was just a domestic argument. But it wasn't. The story quickly made headlines. Father drowns infant in bucket of detergent, one read. Another, Lafayette horror, infant found dead after domestic assault. But behind the shock and headlines was something far more disturbing, a slow, cold unraveling of motive, method, and malice. Because this wasn't a case of postpartum breakdown. It wasn't sudden rage. It was controlled, chillingly so. Police believe Moneus didn't just lash out. He planned. After beating the mother nearly to death, he chose not to kill her yet. He drove her to the hospital, dropped her off, and took the child. And in that window, perhaps hours, perhaps minutes, he chose the bucket. It was not rage. It was ritual. The autopsy confirmed drowning. No blunt trauma, no suffocation. The baby was held face down until movement stopped. The detergent likely burned his skin. Moneus left no note, no explanation, just silence. And that's what haunts investigators the most. Not the blood, not the body, but the absence of any justification. Not even a lie, not even a scream. Just silence. Eliasard Moneus was charged with murder, attempted murder, and domestic battery. He pled not guilty. No bond was set. He sits now in Tippecanoe County Jail, awaiting trial. And the bucket, cleaned, sealed, and tagged, is now evidence. But it's more than that. It's a symbol of erasure, of cruelty without chaos, of a father who looked at his child and saw waste. There are questions that still remain. Why didn't he run? Why didn't he hide the body? Why the chemicals? But perhaps the darkest truth of all is that Eliasard Moneus never wanted to hide what he did. He just didn't care who found out. And what we uncover next will chill you even more.
When investigators found the small white bucket tucked near the trash bin inside the Moneus apartment, they initially assumed it was just another container of cleaning products in a cluttered kitchen. The apartment itself reeked faintly of detergent and dampness, but nothing about that seemed unusual. Only when an officer moved the lid did the suffocating chemical scent intensify, and what lay beneath stunned even the most seasoned detectives.
The outlet reports that
floating in a sickly blue pool of laundry liquid was the tiny, lifeless body of baby Jacob. The detergent had thickened over the days, and bubbles clung to the infant's face like a grotesque mask. The bucket had been carefully sealed shut and positioned behind other containers to avoid detection. It was methodical. It was deliberate. Authorities were stunned.
Tiny,
they had been in this apartment before, just days earlier, when Eliasard Moneus was arrested for the brutal assault on his wife. They had searched, but not thoroughly. No one had thought to open a bucket. The oversight cost precious time, and for the grieving mother, it confirmed her worst nightmare. What followed was a forensic scramble. Gloves, swabs, photographs, a rushed autopsy. The coroner's report was devastating. Asphyxiation due to drowning in a chemical substance. There were no signs of prior injury to the child, no bruises or fractures. The horror of this crime was its coldness. It wasn't rage. It was resolve. A premeditated decision to end a baby's life in silence, with no witnesses but God and the residue of tide. Eliasard Moneus, now in custody, refused to speak. No confession, no explanation. He was calm, almost clinical. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed nothing unusual, no one entering or leaving the apartment during the critical window of time. There was no accomplice, no external trigger. The timeline was clean, and the responsibility pointed directly to one man. Detectives soon pieced together the emotional undercurrent of the case. Moneus had been controlling and possessive. His wife had confided to a neighbor weeks earlier that she felt unsafe, watched, and manipulated. She described their relationship as walking on eggshells, though she never filed a formal report. He isolated her, discouraged her from seeing family, and had even started monitoring her online church group messages. On the night of the murder, their last argument stemmed from her refusal to stop attending virtual church services. That seemingly mundane disagreement became the catalyst for Moneus's final unthinkable act. When she wouldn't submit to his demands, he decided to punish her in the most devastating way imaginable. Investigators labeled it coercive control turned homicidal. The phrase became a shorthand for the grotesque mixture of domestic abuse and calculated murder that defined this case. It wasn't an explosion. It was an execution. The infant was not collateral damage. He was the target. As police delved into Moneus's background, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. He had no prior criminal record, but his internet activity showed a fixation with dominance, punishment, and revenge. He had recently searched terms like how to make someone suffer emotionally and silent ways to punish someone. He also frequented toxic online forums that discussed controlling partners through fear. One investigator described the discovery of these digital breadcrumbs as like walking through the mind of a silent storm. There was no shouting, no chaos, only still, deliberate steps toward evil. Meanwhile, the mother, her name kept private for protection, was recovering from her injuries. The blow to her head had caused a skull fracture and temporary cognitive impairment, but she remembered enough. She remembered her husband leaving the room with Jacob. She remembered the sound of the door shutting, and she remembered the surreal, agonizing realization when he returned alone. She had tried to believe he had taken the baby somewhere safe, that maybe he'd left him with a neighbor or outside a hospital. But as the hours passed and the silver alert was issued, that hope drained away. She told police, "I knew he wanted to hurt me. I just didn't know he'd go that far." The community around them was stunned. Lafayette, Indiana is not a city known for headlines like this. Candlelight vigils were held. The local church where the mother worshipped offered support and counseling. At one vigil, a neighbor wept while holding a baby blanket donated by a local charity. She said he was only 3 months old, just a baby. Prosecutors now faced the task of building a case airtight enough to secure a maximum sentence. They had the body, they had the motive, they had the silence. But they needed to show premeditation, not just inaction. The digital evidence became their linchpin. In court, Moneus's internet history was projected onto giant screens. His chilling search history was read aloud. Jurors looked visibly disturbed. So did the judge. The defense didn't argue innocence. They argued instability, mental health, stress. But no medical history backed that claim. No psychotic break, no diagnosed condition, just motive, control, and a fatal plan carried out without flinching. Whatever the label, the result was the same: a child dead, a mother maimed, and a community shaken. As Moneus sat in solitary confinement awaiting sentencing, he remained unrepentant. No apology, no breakdown, just silence. And that silence was perhaps the loudest horror of all. The sentencing hearing took place on a rainy Thursday morning, mirroring the heaviness in the courtroom. Eliasard Moneus, dressed in a plain orange jumpsuit, entered without resistance. The only sound in the room was the shuffle of legal folders and the restrained sobs of Jacob's mother, seated in the front row, her face drawn, pale, yet resolute. For many in the courtroom, it was the first time they had seen Moneus since the murder had been made public. His appearance shocked some. He looked utterly ordinary. Average height, average build, clean-shaven, calm. But beneath that surface, everyone knew, was a man capable of unimaginable cruelty. The prosecution's opening statement pulled no punches. The lead prosecutor walked the jury through the timeline one final time, from the argument about virtual church, to the blow to his wife's head, to the sickening discovery of baby Jacob's body submerged in detergent. But it wasn't just the crime. They focused on the intent. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of mental collapse, the prosecutor said, his voice sharp. This was punishment. This was a message, and that message was written in silence, sealed in a bucket, and left to rot. The courtroom watched in chilling stillness as screenshots of Moneus's internet history were once again displayed. Searches about emotional punishment, hiding evidence, and child homicide statistics. The jurors didn't look away. Some scribbled notes. Others just stared, slack-jawed. The defense attempted a fragile counter: stress, undiagnosed mental illness, financial strain, but it fell flat.
There was no testimony from mental health professionals, no documented history of breakdowns, just a cold string of actions and an unflinching man in handcuffs. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for, the verdict. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, aggravated battery, attempted murder, child neglect resulting in death. The list was long, and with each word read aloud, Jacob's mother bowed her head lower, her shoulders shaking, but she never cried out. Her silence, this time, was strength. When the judge delivered the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, the courtroom exhaled, not with joy, not with relief, but with finality. A monster had been caged. The judge's final words echoed with rare emotion. This crime was not just a murder. It was an act of spiritual violence against a child, against a mother, and against the trust we place in each other as human beings. May this court never see such cruelty again. Outside, the storm had passed, but the sky remained overcast. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Community leaders gave statements. Jacob's, his only photo, a snapshot of him giggling in a yellow onesie, was printed on candles, posters, even T-shirts. He had become the face of a tragedy no one would ever forget. The mother, whose identity was still protected, was later interviewed by a local journalist. The segment aired in whispers, her voice soft but unwavering. "I carried him for 9 months. He never saw his first birthday. He never said mama. But he mattered, and I will make sure the world remembers him." In the weeks that followed, the ripples of this case spread beyond Lafayette. National news outlets ran the story. Advocacy groups for domestic abuse and child welfare cited Jacob's case as a sobering example of what happens when red flags are missed or minimized. Local domestic violence shelters saw a 28% rise in crisis calls. Some of those callers directly referenced Jacob's name. One shelter director shared, "It's heartbreaking, but also hopeful. Jacob is saving lives, just not in the way any of us wanted." One particularly moving moment came during a citywide memorial. Hundreds gathered holding blue balloons, singing lullabies in the rain. A mural was unveiled on a community wall, a large angelic baby with soft wings surrounded by sunflowers. At the bottom, the words, "His smile lit a room, his story lit a fire." Even law enforcement was changed. The lead detective, interviewed months later, confessed the case had haunted him. He used to think I was tough, that I'd seen it all. But every night for weeks, I saw that bucket when I closed my eyes. I heard the silence, and I wondered, what more could we have done? In response, new procedural guidelines were adopted locally. Officers now perform mandatory visual sweeps of all containers during domestic violence calls. Small policy, big difference. One more child, one more sign might not go overlooked next time. But perhaps the most chilling detail came from a prison psychologist assigned to assess Moneus during intake. He recorded in a private note later released in court records, "Subject shows no remorse, speaks of incident as if it were a solved math problem, clean, conclusive, and impersonal." That's the legacy Moneus leaves behind. Cold precision, no regret, no apology. But Jacob's legacy? Love, awareness, change. And that's where this story ends. Not in a courtroom or in a prison cell, but in the hearts of everyone who refuses to let silence win. If you've made it this far, let Jacob's story stay with you. Let it remind you that control disguised as love is never harmless, that silence can be a scream, that just because someone smiles in public doesn't mean they're safe in private.
If someone you know feels afraid, isolated, or manipulated, believe them. Don't wait. Because monsters don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they carry a baby in one hand and destruction in the other. Please share this story. Speak up. Stay aware. And if you value stories that reveal hard truths, honor victims, and help prevent future tragedies, subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to keep shining a light on the darkest corners of human cruelty. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering Jacob. And thank you for being part of the voice that refuses to stay silent.